Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. And by the end of this episode, please remember to subscribe, give a rating, and a review. Today, if you've always thought of yourself as this person who's always serious and doesn't have much of a fun side to your speaking, to your presentation, and to your storytelling, we have someone who's going to help us to be more edutaining so that we draw our audience in and make it more fun for them to listen to us or deliver our speeches. So please help me welcome Geoffrey Klein.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being on the show, Geoffrey. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we delve into the deeper stuff.
I am a visual storyteller. I'm a producer, so I help people produce video and animation. I'm not actually an animator, but a lot of people think that. And I'm a keynote speaker who talks about visual communication and the power of story. And I really love what I do. It's really fun. I work in marketing generally, so I always think fun is something that I'm lucky enough to do. But I also believe, as you're saying, that we should all be having fun. Life is short. And it's not to say that you shouldn't be serious, because I take what I do very seriously. I just don't take myself very seriously.
That's a major difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the world is hard. And so making sure you have levity and sharing things, and, people want to smile and laugh and enjoy life. And there's some conception that, well, work is work. But if you love what you do, it shouldn't be. And if you're in a job that you don't love, well, if you inject some humor and some levity, it'll make it a little easier. So either way, I'm all about seeing the bright side of life, I guess.
And how did you develop this humor, laughing, fun persona and able to incorporate it into the work that you do?
So I think there's an element of personality that, there's some people that are more serious and some people that are, funnier, and they're people. I think that's part of who I am, is a person who wants to kind of joke around and have fun. I mean, I always, kind of relate to the, I have a very active inner child. And so he wants to play. Now, that being said, there's times and places for what behavior is appropriate. But in terms of in the workplace, when we're working, it's like, oh, you're either having fun or you're working. And I believe that dichotomy is not necessarily something we need to adhere to. I think there are times where, yes, you have to put your nose to the grindstone and work on something, but there are plenty of opportunities within a working space that you can continue to have fun. I think it developed somewhat organically because I've just been always open and eager to live life to the fullest. I've been very blessed with a great family, and with both my grandfather and my father would instill me, you got to want to get up and go to work every day. And I've had instances where I've been in a career where I didn't really like it, and it was a challenge. But by having opportunities to have fun still, it's funny, when I started my company, I was saying I want fun to be a kind of core element. And a friend of mine says, I'm not sure people will take you seriously. And so I tweaked it a slight bit. So I said, okay. He says, well, because what he said to me, he said, when I think of you, yes, you are fun. But when I think about you, one of the things that I like is that you have a lot of enthusiasm. And I said, oh, I really like that. And so the joke I tell people is that I am the CEO, the Chief Enthusiasm Officer.
I like that. Yeah.
Everyone can have enthusiasm for what they do.
And so before we got into what you're doing now, which is visual storytelling, please just give us a bit of your work background, how you got started, when you finished college, which way life took you.
Yeah, I like to tell people I definitely did not take a linear path to where I am. I was an English and sociology major, interested in film and creative writing. And being a kid from Philadelphia, you don't really know what's out there and how you go and do that. I had a love of film and would love to have worked in film, but didn't know anyone, didn't think it was possible, or didn't know how to get there. So I ended up right out of college stumbling into a marketing job for a marketing genius, Seth Godin, who at the time was doing popular reference books. And he really, deserves all the credit and all the accolades that he has, because he really is a super genius when it comes to marketing. And sadly, though, I wasn't quite ready. I was still young. And I also had this interest in movies. So what did I do? I went to law school, because I don't think I was
Interesting
ready to move.
twist.
Yeah, I wasn't. So there's the plot twist. So I wasn't
Mhm.
that. I don't think I was ready. I think there are times you have to kind of recognize where you are in your path. And I wasn't kind of ready to take the leap and move to California and try and pursue working in the film industry. And my family history was a lot of law. My father and my grandfather were both judges. So I went to law school back in Philadelphia, but I ended up working for the Philadelphia Film Commission and still working. I actually was writing reviews for a local newspaper. So I still had my foot in the creative side, and it became clear in law school that I was not going to be a lawyer. So after my
Right.
second year, people joke I was a law school dropout. I moved to California. I did finish my credits. I do have a law degree. I just never use it. But when I moved to LA, I started to work in the film industry. So my first job was in the story department, which was so perfect, at a talent and literary agency, where I spent most of my days reading a bunch of scripts and then writing kind of book reports on them, what they call coverage. And I was really fortunate. I got a job working for the president of production at Paramount Pictures and then MGM. And I got to see how movies got made. I got to see how the stories went from idea or script all the way through production. And it really gave me a grounding for seeing how stories come to life. And it was pretty awesome. And then, as you know, took another plot twist. I met and fell in love with a beautiful girl. We got married, and we moved to her hometown, Manchester, England, where I lived for 10 years, had my 3 children, and ended up working in real estate because that was their family, her father's business. And I
Quick
started out.
interruption. Was it
Yes,
during the Sir Alex Ferguson era of Manchester United?
he was still when I first got to Manchester, but then he exited, I think, fairly quickly after. So I was there from
Okay.
2003. But we had enough United fans that Fergie was well.
Yeah.
The joke I always tell people say, "Who do you support?" And Manchester has 2 big teams, and so people say, "Who do you support? Who do you support?"
Oh
And
yeah,
I would say the
United
Sixers.
interests.
I would say the Sixers, which is the Philadelphia basketball team, and people would look at me very funny. Because I didn't support either of the football teams. I supported
Oh
the
my
Eagles and the
word.
Sixers. And they just scratched their head. But I was in real estate unhappy. And, it was kind of a cautionary tale. Like, if you're unhappy in your job, look to ways to get out. Now I was doing some presenting and being able to tell stories. I learned about the licensing trade. And I was ways to kind of use that in terms of presenting to people. But eventually I said, I got to get into something more creative. And so I went and found a job at a marketing design agency in England. And then I came back to Philadelphia and worked for a brand marketing agency. And then I started my own agency, and we really focus on visual storytelling. So producing video and animation, and it's great. And I really wanted to share my belief that the best way to communicate is by sharing stories. And so that's
Right.
what I speak about.
That is very true. Because if you speak for 45 minutes, people may forget more than half of what you said, but the stories are what they take away and never forget.
Yeah, and I started to research some of the kind of science behind it, and found it really, they say things, there's some statistics, and some people argue about that stories are 22 times more memorable than information. It's clear to me, whatever the specific, I've looked at enough statistics about video and about storytelling and about animation to know it may not be this percentage or that percentage, but the concept is visual stories work and storytelling works, and it's what engages people. And if you're in business or in any capacity, and you're trying to get people to understand what you're talking about and remember you, telling the story is going to help you do that. Now, some people are like, well, I need to communicate some facts and some data. And I'm not saying data isn't important, but data alone will never change people's minds. It will never, if data alone was enough, if information was enough to move us to change our behavior, then none of us would smoke, none of us would drink, all those things, those habits we have we'd be like, oh, you know, on the smoking packet, smoking kills. Well, that's information
Because it's
I should know
cancer.
that.
Okay. Yeah. Bye.
So it's, but when you incorporate that data into a narrative so that people can go along the journey, that's when you start to connect with them emotionally, and they'll then understand it better, and it may actually change their behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because as you said, I mean, they read it all the time. Smoking causes cancer, but they still
Right.
buy it because there's no emotional attachment to that data, to that information. So
Exactly.
when you were working at Paramount and you saw the idea to production process of the story, did you learn did you learn anything about, okay, if we tell the story this way, the movie becomes a blockbuster. If we do it this way, oh, I see why this movie flopped. Is there anything, any trends that you might have noticed that informed your storytelling expertise?
I think again, there's definitely, you know, depending on where you are in the system, because there's some people who are like, let me just find what's going to sell, and some stories sell because of, at least there was a theory, star power. So, oh, you need to see the latest Tom Cruise movie.
Right.
I was fortunate; my boss was you know, a storyteller and keen in telling a good story, and I worked with producers who were really trying to make not just entertaining films, but films that were, you know, going to share some value, even on, you know, even as an entertainment, you know, piece. I would, you know, there's a big person in kind of in Robert McKee, who wrote the Bible, called Story, and it's about the structure. And so if you even go back further, you go back to kind of Aristotle, who's credited with coming up with kind of the 3-act structure, and that still resonates and still is a lot of what people do. Most good stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Mm-hmm.
And in business, so I developed something to help people kind of, okay, great, how do I do that in business? But what the other thing is that stories need conflict. So if you tell a story and it just kind of stays here, no one's going to really care. You need to have the ups and downs of an audience, whether it's a movie, a book, or a presentation, that there's change, that there's conflict and then resolution. I mean, so I would say that some of the techniques of just normal narrative film and writing in general apply, and I've you know, study them about the hero's journey, going to Joseph Campbell. There's an amazing book called Storybrand, where he really breaks it down, Donald Miller, and he and I think I wish I had written the book. I'll tell you that one. That's how much I think it's really good. And he talks about what you're trying to do with your, you know, your customer or your, you know, your client. But a lot of what he talks about are some of the kind of true and tried and true structural ways of telling a story, and understanding that what matters in terms of character, in terms of, you know, setting, all these things add up. And I think one of the reasons that movies somehow work into that is it's a magic to get all those elements right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because with a movie, you're dealing with, okay, it all starts, and I believe this to be true for business stories as well, with the script, the concept, the idea. What is the story you're trying to tell, and making sure that it's worth telling. Because if you can't, so talk about the hook. What's the hook in the story that's going to get people interested in seeing the movie? So you look at trailers, and they have, you know, 30 seconds, a minute to hook you in and want to go see that movie. So to give you enough of the story that you want to know more. And when you think of marketing and you think of, you know, pitches or presentations, that's the same kind of thing you're trying to do. You need to give people enough of the story for them to want more. And so there's an art to it. And part of it has to do with how you structure it, what you tell and what you leave out. You know, I think some people, when they go to presentations, want to dump everything, including the kitchen sink, and people just, you know, it's too much. And so you have to, I think, less is more often in presentations, you know, where you're leaving space so that people can fill them in or ask questions. You know, we talk about when people speak, one of the things that speakers are often taught, which I think is so important, is the power of the pause. Because the power of the pause enables your listener to digest what you just said.
Yeah,
But
they
some
need to
speakers
catch
just keep
up.
talking and talking and talking. Yeah, they need to catch up, and so some speakers just speak on and on and on and on, and you don't have enough time to digest what they said, and you also need that modulation. So I talk about conflict in story. It's the same. You need variety of tone, of pitch, in order to keep people going along with you. If you again talk at the same level all the time,
Hypnotizing.
It's going to be boring.
Yeah.
So and it takes practice. I think that's the thing that you can go to seminars, you can listen to podcasts, you can listen to all these different things. There are two really important things I would always want to share with people. One is find out what works for you, because there isn't a magic wand. There isn't a magic wand that says, okay, if I present this way, everything will be perfect, because every person is unique and has different stories to tell and has different ways to tell them. And you have to tap into those things. If you're not, really funny, then you have to use humor sparingly, because if you keep trying to tell jokes that don't land, it's going to be worse.
People are going to laugh at the fact that your jokes are not funny.
Yeah. And again, so one is, being authentic. I think that's so important. So you have to be self-aware in order to be authentic, because you need to know who you are and how you operate and how you orient yourself in order to deliver in a way that's authentic. And even, one of the things is that I think polished speakers, people go, oh my God, they're just naturals. And I would say that yes, both people, storytellers and speakers, some people have a natural propensity to be better at it, but it's a skill that you can learn.
Right.
And once you're learning it, you need to put it into practice. People get nervous when they're not prepared. So one of the things about speakers is that even the most polished speaker, if they don't prepare for speech, they may get tripped up. And even those speakers who look like they're just flowing, they've done a lot of work before you saw them step on stage. And those rehearsals and practices and all the things they've done to then be able to naturally, it has to do with that preparation and that practice. And I think people are always looking for shortcuts, and sometimes there aren't any. There are best practices, but not necessarily shortcuts.
No, certainly not. And that's the thing, is that yes, you can learn the skill. And what you said earlier is very important. And I always say this when I coach people, I say, you can use the techniques, but still be you, be authentically you. Don't be a Tony Robbins copy. People are going to pick that up as like, oh, you're just being theatrical, and it's not going to work. Be you still.
Well, Oscar Wilde said, be yourself, everyone else is taken.
Exactly.
It's you have to be your version of whatever successful speaker you're trying to be. And, I think Tony Robbins is amazing. And some things he does are, he's Tony Robbins for a reason. He's embraced who he is and gone all in. And I think that's the thing people have to, first of all, they have to identify, okay, who am I? What am I, what is it I've got to share that, will help people? How do I find that people resonate most with it? And then lean into it, really decide if you're going to go big or go home, kind of, in whatever that may mean for you and the way that you're going to communicate.
So on your TED Talk, you told us about this radio station called WeFM. Do you want to tell us more about
WIFM?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm trying to, one of the things about speaking, about story, about communicating, is that you need to recognize the most popular radio station that everyone listens to is WIIFM, which is a fictional station. It stands for What's in It for Me. Anyone you're talking to, that's why, for me, I believe I came up with something called the 11th commandment, which is know thy audience.
Oh, I thought it means don't get caught.
Well, in my world, it's know thy audience.
You're right.
Because no matter how good a speaker, how great you think your topic is, if it doesn't resonate with the audience you're speaking to, then it's just hot air. Who cares? When I speak to businesses, I often say to them, and they don't always like it, I go, nobody cares about what you can do. I'm like, what do you mean? My business, it's important.
I'm
I'm
a
like,
speaker.
nobody
I've
cares.
spoken 10, 100, 5,000 times. I've
I go,
spoken to the
nobody, yeah.
president at the White House. Nobody cares.
People only care about what you can do for them. And so when people are thinking about the speech that they're going to write or the presentation they're going to give, why is your audience going to care? If you don't give them a reason to care, you're going to lose them. And so when people think about you, what story to tell, you want to start with thinking about, well, who's my audience? What do they care about? What's important to them? What's their pain that I can try and help them with? And then craft stories that will help them get further along in their journey to meet those, to solve those problems, to heal that pain.
Mm-hmm. And if anyone asks, how do I know what their current pain is, especially for instance, okay, if it's people who work with and you're presenting or it's another branch of the company, that's easy. But if you are assigned, like you said, you are going to a speaking and engagement in Florida,
Sure.
how will you find out what their pain points are, what they need to know right now? Because you can just have a general idea of your audience, but how do you know what they need to know right now, today, when you start speaking?
Well, usually you're not agreeing to speak and then speaking the next day. So that's part of the preparation piece. So when I work with an event planner, I will ask them, who is the audience that I'll be speaking with? What are they trying to accomplish? What are they trying to get out of being at this conference? What are their pain points? So it's partly asking the person who's hiring you to help you.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's about asking doing some research, looking at who the people are, looking at their businesses, looking at the conference. Oh my God, looking at the other sessions that are there to figure out what is it people seem to be interested in. And so it's about not living in a vacuum, not being a silo in terms of, oh, I have this little thing to say and I don't really care. One of the things that's been suggested, I think it's actually an interesting idea. I haven't done it much. So when I go to a conference, if I'm lucky and I can afford the time, I'll try and go the day before and meet people and talk to them and ask questions. So the way you get to know your audience is by being curious and by being interested. The distinction between interested and interesting is one that I continually harp on about because I think it's so important. They did a study where people in networking situations, so you and I would be in a networking situation, you and I'd be talking, and I'd be asking you lots of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Roberta, tell me about this, tell me more. And then you would leave and they would ask you when you left, what did you think of Geoffrey? And you'd be, he was so interesting, even though I hadn't told you that much about myself. It's not about being interesting, it's about being interested. And so again, it has twofold benefits. One, the person feels heard, and therefore you're deepening that relationship and that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And two, if you're a good listener, which is really important in terms of learning about your audience, you'll pick up the things that matter to the people that you're going to talk to. Someone has suggested you do that right as you start your speech. You go and introduce yourself. So you start your speech, and whether or not you have the time, if you do beforehand, to go in the audience and how you doing? Tell me about it, and then be able to take that up and use it when you're talking. So the idea is if I'm having a presentation, I say, Roberta, nice to meet you. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from South Africa. And then I'm in Chicago. And I can then in my speech say, I'm from Philadelphia, and I'm big into sports. I know Roberta here may be a Chicago Bulls fan, but I can't help it. I'm a big Sixers fan. Or, so using again the things, because if I do that, how great are you going to feel that I've included you in my presentation and
In
we
your
just met?
speech. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's not always easy to do. That's probably, higher level learning in terms of and practice. But again, it's thinking about how can you engage with the people that you're with. And that starts from the way you're introduced, how you come out, having that eye contact, all those other techniques about the delivering of a speech.
Right.
they all add up. If you want to have the mindset of, I'm here, to engage the people who are here to hear from me, not I'm here because I have something important to say.
Oh, because I'm such a good speaker.
Yeah, let me showcase with you how phenomenal I am at articulation. Yeah,
Exactly.
not.
I
And it
call
has to
them
be
the.
real. It has to be,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, it has to be genuine. I enjoy sharing what I am passionate and enthusiastic about with others because I believe that by sharing that, I can help them be better at what they do.
Mm.
That's foundational. You're just there because for ego, for the money, for those things, you're not going to last very long, and you're not going to be very effective.
Not a long-term plan for sure. Yes. I call them the muffin and coffee conversations. In the morning, usually conferences start at 9 a.m., but you come at 8 for registration, getting your name tags. That's when you talk to people. You get a sense of, yes, they've given you the information you spoke about earlier, but you get a sense of them individually. And I always say to people, the one benefit of that, you realize how much everyone is rooting for you. And they, oh, I look forward. Yes, I saw your name on the program, on the agenda. I look forward to hearing from you, Geoffrey. This is going to be exciting. Instead of thinking, oh, they want to judge me. Oh, if I make a mistake, they're going to laugh. You realize none of that will ever happen.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, that the audience is rooting for you in 99% of the cases. Maybe you have one person who's just trying to be a heckler. And the other thing about, if you make a mistake, it's okay, because guess what? They don't know what you're going to say.
I tell them that all the time. They don't have your script. They don't have your speech. And if it's a slip of the tongue, which even I do on this podcast, is you can laugh together.
Right. It's being vulnerable, something that we're taught, oh, that shows weakness. And I say, no, what it shows is how human we are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, you're halfway, you're a lot further along to connecting with your audience than by being perfect and by being, overly polished.
Exactly.
So there are times I'm like, should I mess up on purpose? And will that endear me to the audience? But again, it has to be genuine. So you can't fake messing up, because that would then, so it's just be yourself and take a beat. Something doesn't go perfectly right, it's okay. Everyone, as you said, is rooting for you. Just be open about it.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Well, what was I going to say next? Do you know? Like there's ways.
The audience sometimes will tell you. Yes.
What was I talking about? I think there's, and I think again, I believe that this goes to kind of one of my beliefs, which is I think that stories connect humanity. And so the more human you can be, the better. And so just be yourself, be genuine, and don't allow something not going perfectly right to derail you from what you're trying to do. You remember, you're there to help them. And if you're in service to your audience, they'll be very forgiving.
Exactly. You're in service to them. So it's not about how you look. Don't obsess over that. When I have a slip of the tongue, I always say my South African accent is debating with the American pronunciation I'm supposed to get right.
You say tomato, I say tomato. So
there you go. Right. So now tell us 2 or 3 tips at most of, if somebody says, I really don't know how to incorporate the story, the fun part, the edutainment, as you said, into my speech. I'm so narrow visual, as in, oh, now I'm speaking. Let me talk about my data, my pitch, my software, and what it can do for them, and goodbye.
So I think there's a couple things. I'll give 3 things I think will really help. One is to recognize that the stories you have that you like, other people probably like. And one of the things you can do, I think, if you're going to be on stage or you're going to present a lot, is to start what I call a story bank. And a lot of people, this isn't original to me, but to just get a Word document, get an Excel sheet where you can start to list all, because we've all had experiences that are both different, but that can connect with people. So whether we've had loss or we've had, wins, or we've had all the different emotional. So I would say when you're thinking about stories, think about emotions and senses. So because at the end of the day, we're trying to make people feel something.
Right.
So when you're telling a story, you want to think about, okay, how does this make people feel when I tell it to them? Or what I'm hoping that they'll feel. Because one of my favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou, which says, people will forget what you said, people forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And so I think that's part of the goal. So there are a couple of tips in there, which is A, create a story bank and think about the emotions that it evokes, so that you can then use them in a certain time. But if you have a list of 15 stories, then you can say, okay, for this, speech, this one works. And also recognizing, even though you might love a story, maybe it doesn't fit this audience. You may go, not that. So you have to be, again, willing to, don't get so in love with a story that you're not willing to not use it when it doesn't fit.
Even it's not relevant.
Yeah. Let me tell you about the time that I scored, 50 points on the basketball court, because that'll make me feel good. And you're like, what is he talking? Yeah. If it's not going to help them, then you cut it. So I think it's important to have a story bank. I think it's also important that if you are excited about what you're talking about, the audience will be. So having energy, having that enthusiasm, smiling, the little things. So I think it's important to remind yourself, you're on stage, you're getting to share with people. Have fun with it. If you're having fun, they're going to have fun. And then, the tips are like, how can you engage people? So there's lots of ways to do it. I'm a big fan of kind of gamification and getting people involved in that way, but you don't have to think about it that way. There's simple things like asking questions, because when you ask a question, people will perk up. So let me ask you a question. How many people here, have been to Chicago? It doesn't really, there are ways to get them involved. And if you think about what your topic is, people came here because they're interested in it. So if you're talking about, workplace culture, how many people love the culture they're in? How many people find it really great when your boss comes over and doesn't say hello and just shoves paper in your face? So again, thinking about stories that are real to people, but engaging them. So not just not talking at them, talking with them.
Yes.
And there are ways, there are a lot of different techniques about how you do that. People now, technology is catching up, so there's ways to ask polls live in real time. I use a technique where I ask a question and that they can answer on their phone, and then the answers create a word cloud in real time. And what I love about it is because if you put in the word, if I say, one of the questions asked is, what are the consequences of poor communication? And they're like distrust. And so if you put distrust and you see distrust up on
shows up there,
you're like, that's from me. And like, immediately that person now feels part of the session. And how great is that? So I think, again, it's about, and again, knowing what you're good at, what you're comfortable with. So whether, not all people dream of being a game show host like myself, but there are other ways, we all, again, being interested with your audience, I'll give you a really simple one. You could ask the audience where they're from, and you could reward, and rewards, I think, is important in terms of, again, giving people value, even if it's, not necessarily perceived value in terms of, oh, this is going to change your life. If you bring a candy bar and you're like, okay, where are people from? Who's from the United States? And you find the person who's traveled the furthest, and you give them, okay, you the furthest, here's a chocolate bar. You've asked where lots of people from, and everyone loves to talk about where they're from. And then that person even the person who didn't get the chocolate bar will be like, that's cool. He cares enough to find out who's traveled the furthest and give them a little something. And there are lots of variations on that, but I think it's about thinking about what can you do to connect with your audience.
Right.
And
I think those are really, those are really good.
Sharing statistics often do it. How about this? Put a statement on the wall, on a slide.
Yes.
Raise your hand if you agree with this. Okay, now raise your hand if you don't agree with this. And you're already, people, again, something as simple, maybe everyone agrees and everyone disagrees, but you're asking the audience to participate. And if you can get your audience to participate, even in a small way, I think that is the difference between a lecture, which no one wants to go to.
I hate it at
to
university. I don't want to
Right.
experience that in adulthood.
Yeah, and it's not fun. It's not fun versus an engaging session that is a little interactive. So I think if there's ways to be a little interactive, people will be thankful. Will thank you for that, and they'll be grateful. Oh, so it's partly just being thoughtful. But again, finding ways to include people without putting people on the spot. You don't always want to do that.
Of course not. No. Yeah.
but people saying where they're from is usually not a big deal. You're not asking personal questions. You're asking questions
or anything political or religious. No.
I always stay away from those. Not everyone does. I stay away from anything political, anything religious, anything sexual innuendo is a no for me. It's too risky.
Dividing as well, and so yeah.
Whose favorite color is blue? Whose favorite color is red? And then everyone loves their favorite color. You and I love purple, and everyone else is wrong about the best color, but it's okay.
Anyone who's listening, if you don't love purple, you're wrong. We love purple.
No,
kidding.
Every color, and that's the thing about it is everyone. I've done games where I include snacks and things, and I think the most engaged and this was a virtual audience, was when I said, "What's your favorite flavor of ice cream?"
Really?
People were like, oh my God, I love butter pecan. Oh, I'm chocolate marshmallow. And so because it's enabling them to share something about themselves and therefore feel included.
The inner child, the feelings, the emotion, it all came together when ice cream was mentioned.
I think so. They're like, ooh, this is fun. I'm not thinking about insurance. I'm not thinking about whatever. I'm thinking about ice cream. Who doesn't like to talk about ice cream?
Exactly.
So it's about, again, finding ways to connect our humanity, and I think there are ways, whether it's through a poignant story, or it's through some humor, or it's through interests. What are people interested in? And finding those opportunities to share that with someone to hopefully engage them.
Just before we close, speaking of being interesting versus being interested, that can be applied to dating as well. I don't know if you have, you've been married a long time, you probably no longer know any single people, but if they tell you their dating stories and how, oh, I didn't like that guy, all he did was talk about himself. I'm not going to see him again.
I'm about to celebrate 20 years. So, and interestingly, I like to talk about myself. I like to talk in general, as many speakers do.
Yeah.
My wife is beloved, and part of the reason she's beloved by others is because she's genuinely curious about people.
Wow.
She is genuine. That's just who she is. I've learned from her the power of being curious. It really, by asking questions, and she likes to hear about, she's that kind of person. I think even if you are, somewhat egocentric, as many of us are, if you can try and work towards being a little more interested in others, it will go a long way in terms of endearing you and connecting with others.
Very, very important, very key. Geoffrey, thank you so much for your time today. You have helped not just the listeners, but especially me, because the humor, the stories, and how you craft them, I'm still a work in progress in that with my speaking. So that's going to be a really, really big.
I think we're all works in progress, but thank you so much for having me. And
before you go, where can we find you so that we can continue this conversation online?
So I have two different buckets. Anything related to speaking, Geoffrey Klein. That's the website, and most of the socials. So Instagram, geoffreyklein.com would be the website. My company, 9 Dots Media. If you're ever interested in visual content or wanting to craft your story, 9 Dots Media will get you there. And again, most of the socials there. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anyone to talk about any of this. It's, as I said, I'm very enthusiastic about this, and always happy to have a conversation with someone if I think I can be helpful.
And trust me, for the listeners, Nine Dots Media, I've seen some amazing visuals behind Geoffrey's screen as we're having this conversation today.
We keep working on it.
Exactly. Thank you so much for being on the show. Don't forget to subscribe, give a rating and a review, and we'll be with you next time.